welcome to Algebra 1. Let's go ahead and get started. Here we're going to divide polynomials. Here we have step-by-step on how to start dividing polynomials. Polynomials are binomials, trinomials, so it's 2 terms, 3 terms, 4 terms. So you're dividing a term, 2 term by 3 term, or etc. Here we have, simple steps to divide. There's going to be 2 different ways we can learn how to divide these. And the first way is just dividing. Here, so here it says factor the numerator and denominator. We're going to divide. According to this, when you're dividing, it's always the first number on top divided by the second number on the bottom. So then you'll have 8x cubed plus 12x squared plus 4x divided by 4x. The first one divided by the second one. First thing you do, you factor out numerator, denominator. Numerator, you can factor out a common factor. When you're always factor out common factors and then factor trial by error, or the other ways we factor. So here we can factor out the denominator. Here they at least have 4. They have a 4 in their factors and they have at least 1x. So when I factor that out, remember you're dividing with numbers and you're subtracting with exponents. 8 divided by 4, 2. 3 minus 1, 2x squared. 12 divided by 4, 3. 2 minus 1, just 1. 4x divided by 4x, that's just your 1. And now this is all over 4x. Keep in mind, just because it divides, it doesn't mean it equals 0. There has to be something in place of that number. There's 3 terms here. There has to be 3 terms in between the parentheses. Now, you cross out common factor. So there's a 4x on top, there's a 4x on the bottom. They can factor out and simplify. In this case, we can simplify because now your answer is 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. Next one. So here we're dividing, same thing, we're dividing the top one, which is x squared minus 6x plus 9. We're dividing this by x minus 3. Anytime you see binomials, just put parentheses over it, meaning you can't really cancel one thing out in between the parentheses. You have to cancel out both things. Here, let's go ahead and factor. The numerator, you can factor that. So it looks like it's a factor by trial and error, meaning find factors of c, 9, positive 9, that equal b, which is negative 6. And when it's positive, either both factors are positive or both factors are negative. To get negative 6, it looks like it's negative 3 times negative 3 gives you positive 9. When you add them, you get negative 6. So those are your factors. And then you factor numerator denominator, you cross out common factors. In this case, we have 1x minus 3, 1x minus 3. They don't cancel both out. Now you're left with just an x minus 3, and that's your answer. Next one, we have x squared minus 5x plus 6 divided by 2 minus x. Before we go ahead and divide with fractions, let's go ahead and change this. We always want the variable to come out first. So it looks like if we factor out a negative 1, or just a negative, remember it changes the signs between those parentheses. Now we have negative 2 and positive x. Again, I don't like how this looks. I prefer the variable to be first, so I just switch it. So now I have negative x minus 2. So now I'm dividing this by negative times x minus 2. Now we can go ahead and divide. So I have x squared minus 5x plus 6 divided by negative x minus 2. In this case, now we factor the numerator and denominator. The numerator can be factored even more, so keep in mind I have to put the negative right next to it. I can't forget about the negative. Factors of 6 that equal negative 5. 6 is positive, so both your factors are either positive or negative. Your answer will be minus 2 and minus 3. 6 and 1 would not work because the only way you can get negative 5 is if you make one of those factors a negative, but in this case, it's positive 6. Only for positive numbers, either both of them are positive or both of them are negative. Now, we go ahead and we factor out. Now let's go ahead and cancel anything that they have in common. They have x minus 2 in common. This negative is like a negative 1. So x minus 3 divided by negative 1, it's like saying negative x minus 3. Because anytime you multiply or divide by a negative, you get just a negative answer. So you can leave it like that, or if you want to distribute it even more, you'll have negative x plus 3, or 3 minus x. All 3 of those answers are okay. Example 3, now we're going to start learning how to divide polynomials just like the old-fashioned way we've learned in grade school. So here we have negative 25x plus 3x squared plus 8 divided by x minus 8. First of all, this is not in descending order. Always make sure your exponents are in descending order. So if I make it into descending order, I have 3x squared minus 25x plus 8 is dividing into x minus 8. When you have that, you create just a normal division symbol that we've used in grade school. You have your x minus 8 here, you have your second term on the outside, and then the dividend, the number in between here, we get 3x squared minus 25x plus 8. To divide these, it's just like going back into grade school. You always focus on the first term of each one. We're focusing on 3x squared and we're focusing on x. We're not focusing on x minus 8. You're always focusing on the first term of each one. So here, you're focusing on how many times or what number you multiply x to get 3x squared. So x times what gives you 3x squared? That would be x times what, or 1 times what gives you 3. That would be a number 3. X times what gives you x squared. Remember, when you're multiplying variables, you're adding exponents, so you can think of 2 minus 1, and you'll end up with a remainder of an x. So that means you'll have 3x, and I'm going to put it right here, because if you multiply 3x times x, you'll end up with 3x squared. Also, when you're doing these type of fractions, you always make sure you line up the correct place value, or the exponent value. So I didn't put this up here, because of the fact that here is an x squared, so only x squared belongs in this place right here. Here we have x's, and then here we have the constant, or just the number by itself. Now we have 3x here. So first you divide first, then you go ahead and multiply. But when you multiply, you have to make sure you multiply both numbers. 3x times x, remember you add the exponents, you get 3x squared, positive 3x squared. You need it to match exactly. And then 3x times negative 8, you get negative 24x. You're multiplying from this point. So you multiply both of them out, and then you end up with that. So first thing is, I'll put it here on the side, you divide. That's the step I did here to get the 3x. 2, you multiply. 3, you subtract. But don't forget to change your signs. It's very important. So now, we did first step, second step, we go ahead and make a line, we put a parentheses over them, and we subtract. But whenever you subtract, especially when you have 2 terms, just like over here, you have to make sure you distribute the 2 terms into the negative. So here, if I'm subtracting, basically what that means is I'm changing the signs between the 2 binomials. So that means this positive now turns into a negative, this negative now turns into a positive, and then I go ahead and add. These always cancel out every time. It should always cancel out. There should never be any remainder there. So you could put 0 there, but I'm not going to put anything there. So now I'm going to go ahead and add down negative 25x plus 24x. They are like terms. You always make sure to line up, so it should all be the same there. So when you add these together, you just get negative x. You get negative 1x. And now you bring everything else down. So this is a positive 8. I bring it down. And now you go back and you start over. So you do repeat 1 through 4 until you have no remainder, or you have just a number by itself. So now my new number, so if I erase this, my first term is now negative x, and then I'm still using the x there to focus on it. So x times what gives you negative x? So they have the same x. It looks like I'm not going to multiply by another x. But if I multiply it by negative 1, I can get negative x. So x times what gives you negative x? That would be a negative 1. Now, you multiply. Make sure you multiply both numbers. So now, my new arrows, I'm going to do this one here, and I'm going to do this one here. Negative 1 times x, negative x. Again, make sure they match up, negative and negative. Negative 1 times negative 8, positive 8. Step 3, you subtract. So that means put your parentheses, put a minus sign here, and you change your signs. This x becomes positive, this h becomes negative, and I just put a circle there to know that I'm not adding, I'm actually subtracting. Now, go ahead and add. So these cancel out. Negative x plus x cancel out. 8 minus 8, they also cancel out. That means your remainder is a remainder of 0. So you just go step by step into solving these type of problems. Next one. Here, 2x squared minus 9 minus 7x. Make sure they're in descending order. This one wasn't. 9 divided by, and this again, I don't like the x being second. I prefer being first. So x minus 4. All I did was just switch it. Now let's go ahead and divide. We have our x minus 4 divided by our 2x squared minus 7x minus 9. Now we go ahead and divide. So in this case, we will have a remainder in the end. So now 2x squared and x times what gives you 2x squared? That will be positive 2x, make sure they line up. Now you multiply both terms. 2x times x, 2x squared. 2x times negative 4, you're gonna get negative 8. Then you put your parentheses, you put your subtraction sign. Then you change your signs in between the parentheses. These will cancel out and you have x. So negative 7 plus 8, you just have an x as a remainder. Bring this one down, so minus 9. Now we repeat it again. So x, what times x gives you x, and that would be a 1. You can't just put a 0. Anything that multiplies into 0 gives you 0. So now you multiply these two again. So 1 times x, you get x. 1 times negative 4 gives you negative 4. Then put your subtraction sign. Then you change your signs in between. These cancel out. It should always cancel out every time. And you'll have a negative 5. If you notice, you can't go any further because x times what gives you negative 5. It doesn't have an x there, so therefore you have to stop. And plus, that's the last number you bring down. There's nothing else I can do from this step. Now I have a remainder. So whenever I have a remainder, let's say when you're dividing a number on the outside here, you always make sure you have your remainder. You make a fraction. Here it's a negative 5, so I'm going to put a minus sign there. So it's going to be 5 on top, and your denominator is always going to be the number on the outside, which is x minus 4. I didn't say on this one, but your answer would be 3x minus 1. But here, now we have a remainder. This one had a remainder of 0. This one has a remainder of negative 5. So now you make a fraction. You have the remainder on top, and then you have your original problem that you're dividing on the bottom. So now your answer would be 2x plus 1 minus 5 over x minus 4. And that's it. Next one, you divide those two. Here I'm going to go ahead and put it in descending order. So 3x cubed. If you notice that there's no x squared, you have to put everything in descending order, meaning it has to be in order. If you start at 5, you have to work backwards. 4, 3, 2, 1, and then your constant. So we have x cubed. We have to make sure there's an x squared. There is no x squared here, so that means you're just going to put a 0x squared. Let's say you have x to the 5th power and you skip to x cubed, you have to put 0x to the 4th power. There has to be a descending order there. So now you have minus 2x plus 5 divided by, and here I don't like it like this. I'm putting the variable first. I have x minus 3. You always make sure you have it in descending order as well for the second one. Now, let's go ahead and divide. So we have our x minus 3. We have our sign here. Now we have 3x cubed plus 0x squared minus 2x plus 5. Again, make sure you're always lining up your numbers when you're dividing. This is my first term here, my first term here. X times what gives you 3x cubed. So 1 times what gives you 3. That's a 3. I'll put it on top of this one. 3 minus 1 gives you an x squared. So divide the numbers and subtract the exponents here. So now you subtract. First step, divide. Now you multiply. 3x squared times x, 3x cubed. 3x squared times negative 3, that gives you a negative 9x squared. Make your line. Now you subtract. When you subtract, you change your signs for both terms. This becomes a negative, this becomes a positive. This cancels out, and now you're left with 9x squared. Always bring everything down. So 9x squared minus 2x plus 5. Now, your first term, again, is 9x squared. Now you start over. 1 times what gives you 9? That would be a positive 9. 2 minus 1 gives you an x, so I have that x right there. So now, I multiply the two numbers. 9x times x, 9x squared. 9x times negative 3, negative 27x. Now, make your line. You're subtracting. and then you change your sign. This was negative, this is negative now, this is positive now, and this cancels out completely. It should always cancel out. And then here you'll end up with 25x, and then bring this down, plus 5. Your first new term is 25x, and you're still focusing on your x. X times what gives you 25x? In this case, just the number 25. So 25 times x, you get 25x. 25 times negative 3 is negative 75. Make your fraction. Now you subtract. When you subtract, you change your signs between the parentheses. This cancels out like it should be. And then you add this, you get 80. X cannot go into 80 at all. You can't make a negative exponent to make it to have a number of 80. So therefore, that's your remainder. So it's positive, so I'll put plus, make a fraction bar. Your numerator is your remainder. Your denominator is this outside number here. So the whole thing will be, your answer would be 3x squared plus 9x plus 25 plus 80 over x minus 3. It's a number right here that you divide it. You should always be doing your homework on a separate sheet of paper before you enter it online. It should not be like a guess and you press random buttons. You do have to work these problems out. You see these a lot in Algebra 2. Last one and we're done. In the book, it tells you a word problem. Again, you should have your book in front of you. I'm not going to read it for the sake of time. But we have the area. And in this case, for the area of the shape there, it's area equals length times width. They ask you what it is. I think this is, yeah. So they're asking you what is the length. So we have area equals length times width. To get the length by itself, put question mark. You have to divide both sides by w, and then you have a over w is equal to your length, and that's how you find it, because they don't give you a length and they don't give you a width, so you don't multiply. They gave you the area and they gave you the width of it, so that means you have to divide. So your area, which I have up here, x squared minus 11x plus 30, divided by your width, which is x minus 6. And then just like the first couple examples, we go ahead and divide. You factor first. So x squared minus 11x plus 30, factors of positive 30, that give you negative 11. That would be negative 5 and negative 6. When you multiply them, you get a positive 30. Remember, positive numbers, they're both positive, they're both negative. In this case, they're both negative, x minus 6 and x minus 5. And then the third step, according to over there, you simplify, meaning you cancel out any common factors. That means your length is equal to x minus 5. In that case, feet, but you don't put that. So if you need any more help, make sure to let me know down there. Have a good day in the Dropbox.